I never imagined that a simple act of generosity would unravel the fragile balance within my family, but looking back now, I can see how every decision creates ripples, even when made with good intentions. When my sister-in-law went through her breakup, she was left stranded in more ways than one. Her partner had always been the one who handled logistics, bills, and transportation, and suddenly she was forced to rebuild her life from the ground up. I had been through upheavals of my own in the past, so when she reached out to me, I recognized that quiet panic behind her calm exterior. She needed support, not judgment or dramatic reactions. She needed stability, even temporarily, and I happened to be in a position to offer it. At first, I debated whether stepping in would create unnecessary tension. My mother-in-law had always been the type to prefer that family matters stay within her control, as if she were the central figure keeping all the threads tied together. But my husband was out of town for work, and decisions fell squarely on my shoulders. My sister-in-law was alone, scared, and struggling to cover expenses. She mentioned that she needed a bit of money to manage her bills and groceries until her next paycheck, and after thinking it over for a couple of hours, I decided that the compassionate thing to do was to help her. It wasn't a huge sum, nothing that would impact my life dramatically, and I gave it freely with no expectations other than her well-being. As the days passed, she began to stabilize. She found comfort in the fact that someone believed in her, someone trusted her to get back on her feet. She applied to switch to a better position at work, started cooking again, and even laughed occasionally when we spoke. It felt good to witness her resilience resurfacing. I thought I had done the right thing, maybe even something that would ultimately strengthen the bonds within the family. Kindness, after all, tends to ripple outward. But I completely underestimated the storm that was quietly gathering behind the scenes. My mother-in-law called me unexpectedly one afternoon, and from the first moment I sensed tension radiating through the silence. Her tone carried a weight that immediately tightened my chest. Before I could even settle into the conversation, she launched into a tirade fueled by misunderstandings and assumptions. She insisted that my involvement in her daughter's life had undermined her parental role. She claimed that my help had made her look incapable, as if I had swooped in to replace her, to steal her authority, to position myself as the new problem solver in the family. I listened, absorbing each accusation like stones thrown into still water. There was no space for explanation, no calm openness that might have allowed me to untangle the truth from her fears. Her disappointment stung, not because I felt guilty, but because I had genuinely believed the family would be united in wanting her daughter to feel supported. Instead, I became the target of resentment. She insisted that my actions had fractured the foundation of the family and accused me of meddling in matters that were not mine to fix. I wanted to tell her that no one else had stepped forward, that her daughter had felt abandoned, that sometimes support simply comes from whoever has the strength to offer it in the moment. But the frustration in her voice made it clear that she had already constructed her own version of events, with me positioned as the villain. For days afterward, I felt emotionally drained. I replayed the situation over and over, searching for missteps or hidden implications I might have missed. I had never tried to replace anyone or overstep boundaries. I simply wanted my sister-in-law to feel safe and capable again. Yet the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the issue had little to do with the money I lent. It had everything to do with the shifting dynamics within the family. My mother-in-law had always relied on being the person her children turned to in crisis, and watching her daughter turn to me instead struck a sensitive chord that had nothing to do with logic or fairness. It was emotional territory she wasn't prepared to share. My sister-in-law, meanwhile, was doing her best to rebuild her life piece by piece. She slowly regained her independence, and each new step she took brought pride and relief to both of us. She never asked for more than she needed, never treated my assistance as anything other than a temporary bridge. But even as she healed, I found myself carrying the weight of the confrontation with my mother-in-law. I didn't want tension within the family, especially not tension born from a misunderstanding. I attempted to reach out, to soften the edges around the conflict, but each interaction felt stilted and brittle. My mother-in-law kept conversations short, polite in a distant way that made it obvious she had not forgiven what she saw as an intrusion. I tried to tell myself that time would mellow her perspective. Families argue, misunderstandings rise, yet eventually wounds heal. That was the narrative I clung to. But some wounds, I learned, require more than time. They require willingness, humility, and an openness that the other person must bring to the table. In this case, she didn't. The tension eventually seeped into family gatherings. She would glance at me briefly, offer a tight smile, then shift her attention elsewhere. My husband noticed, gently trying to reassure me that it wasn't my fault. My sister-in-law noticed too, and the guilt on her face was almost harder to bear than the coldness directed at me. She apologized repeatedly, even though she had done nothing wrong. I reminded her that healing often creates uncomfortable transitions and that I didn't regret helping her. And I meant it. I would make the same decision again, no matter the cost. Over time, I began to feel something shift inside me, a quiet strength rooted in clarity rather than defensiveness. Helping someone in genuine need does not make me the villain. Supporting another person through a painful chapter of their life is not an offense. No amount of misplaced anger could erase the fact that compassion had brought someone stability at a moment when she needed it most. I realized that I could not control how others interpreted my actions. I could only ensure that my intentions aligned with my values. Eventually, the emotional waves settled. My mother-in-law continued to keep her distance, but no longer let it define my sense of self. The family had subtly rearranged its shape, creating new boundaries, new understandings, new gaps. It wasn't perfect, but families rarely are. The important part was that my sister-in-law grew stronger, more confident, more capable of standing on her own. Watching her thrive gave me a quiet sense of fulfillment that outweighed every moment of conflict. I learned that doing the right thing does not always earn gratitude, and doing the kind thing sometimes brings unexpected backlash. But I also learned that truth sits quietly within the heart, and moved by the noise around it. I lent her money because she needed help. I supported her because I cared. And no amount of anger or misunderstanding could alter that. In the end, what mattered most was that she found her footing again, and I found mine too, standing firmly in the knowledge that integrity does not require recognition, only intention. As the months passed, life gradually settled into a quieter rhythm, yet the emotional residue of the situation remained like a faint echo in the background. I carried on with my routines, focusing on my work, my home, and the small things that kept me grounded. My sister-in-law continued to rebuild her independence with determination that made me quietly proud. She began taking evening classes, applied for a promotion at her job, and even started saving for her own place. Each milestone she reached served as a reminder of how far she had come from the day she had practically whispered her worries, trying not to seem like a burden. Despite her progress, the lingering tension from my mother-in-law's reaction would occasionally resurface in unexpected ways. A strained tone during a family call, a distant expression across the dinner table, or an offhand remark left hanging as if inviting me to absorb the blame yet again. At first, every small gesture tightened something in my chest, making me wonder if I should have tried harder to mend things sooner. But the truth was that I had already extended my hand more than once, and each time it had been met with a wall rather than a bridge. Eventually, I learned to set the discomfort aside and focus on what I could control. The turning point arrived one quiet morning in early spring. I was sitting outside with my coffee, watching the breeze rustle the leaves in the garden, when I realized that my perspective had shifted completely. I had stopped waiting for an apology. Stopped hoping for understanding. Stopped trying to justify what didn't need justification. Instead, I felt a slow, calm acceptance settle over me. People interpret life through their own fears, insecurities, and expectations. Sometimes they project their anxieties onto others because it feels easier than facing the raw vulnerability beneath them. My mother-in-law's anger had never truly been about me. It was about her own fear of losing relevance, her struggle to accept that her children were adults capable of making their own choices, and her discomfort with no longer being the primary source of support in their lives. Once I understood that, Something in me softened not toward her behavior, but toward the emotional landscape that had produced it. I didn't excuse her actions, yet I no longer carried them as a weight. I found myself able to breathe lighter, speak more freely, and show up at family gatherings without the familiar knot in my stomach. I didn't need her approval to validate the kindness I had offered. I only needed to stay aligned with the person I wanted to be. Around this time, my sister-in-law approached me with a tentative sort of excitement, the kind that comes from finally seeing the horizon after months of navigating through fog. She had been approved for a small apartment not far from her workplace and was preparing to move out of her temporary living arrangement. I helped her pack boxes, sort through belongings, and choose simple pieces that made her new space feel like a beginning rather than a reminder of what she had left behind. Watching her unpack dishes in the kitchen, hang up her clothes, and place familiar little items on the shelves was like watching someone piece together a new chapter with careful, hopeful hands. When everything was settled, she turned to me with a look that needed no words. It was a mixture of gratitude, pride, and emotional clarity that made me realize how deeply our bond had grown through all of this. She didn't owe me thanks, her strength was its own testament. Still, I felt a quiet warmth knowing I had played a small part in helping her rediscover her footing. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law remained distant, though in a less confrontational way. It was as if she had retreated into a space where she could process things at her own pace without the need for dramatic reactions. I didn't push her. I had learned that forcing reconciliation rarely leads to real healing. If she ever chose to revisit the past with an open heart, I would listen. If she chose not to, I would still move forward. My husband eventually returned from his long work assignment and sensed the subtle shifts in the family dynamics. I told him everything, not to seek validation but to ensure that the silence surrounding the situation didn't grow into something heavier. He supported me gently and without hesitation, grounding me in a way that made me feel seen and understood. He reached out to his mother as well, hoping to ease some of the strain, but he quickly discovered that she wasn't ready to examine her reactions. She brushed off his attempts with dismissive reassurances that she was fine and preferred not to revisit the past. That was her choice, and we learned to respect it without letting it dictate the mood of the household. Over time, something unexpected happened. Even though the rift had never fully healed, the atmosphere around it began to lose its sharp edges. Family gatherings felt less like emotional minefields and more like neutral grounds. Conversations flowed more easily. The glances that had once carried and spoken blame now felt neutral, almost indifferent. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't hostility either, and neutrality was enough to allow everyone to coexist peacefully. My own life expanded in ways that helped shift my focus. I took on new projects, nurtured my hobbies, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. The experience had made me more aware of the quiet strength that comes from standing by one's values, especially when misunderstood. I found myself more confident, more reflective, and more certain of the kind of presence I wanted to bring into the world. One evening months later, my sister-in-law invited me over to her apartment for dinner. It was simple, comforting, and full of laughter. Her home felt lived in and warm, filled with small hints of her personality that had resurfaced after the breakup. As we talked about her plans and dreams, I realized how far she had come from the moment she had reached out for help. She was no longer the vulnerable, shaken person who had felt lost in the aftermath of her breakup. She had reclaimed herself, piece by piece, through resilience and grace. And in that moment, everything came full circle within me. I understood clearly that the turbulence with my mother-in-law had been a chapter, not the whole story. The true story was one of healing, growth, and connection. Sometimes the right thing leads to friction, misunderstanding, and emotional upheaval. But that doesn't make it any less right. Kindness can be messy, compassion can be complicated, but the impact they leave is profound and lasting. As I walked home that night, they were cool and calm around me. I felt a deep sense of closure not because the conflict had been resolved, but because I no longer needed it to be. I had offered support when it mattered most. I had stood firm without resentment. And I had allowed the experience to shape me into someone stronger and more self-assured. Some stories end with grand resolutions, apologies, or moments of dramatic clarity. Mine simply settled into a quiet truth. I had helped someone I cared about, and nothing, not anger, misunderstanding, or time could diminish the sincerity of that choice. As the year continued to unfold, the emotional landscape within the family shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. There were no dramatic turning points, no sudden reconciliations, no sweeping changes that tied everything neatly together. Instead, what emerged was a quiet, steady evolution, a slow settling of dust after a long period of upheaval. Life moved forward in small, meaningful increments, teaching me that healing often arrives not with fanfare, but with gentle persistence. My sister-in-law continued to thrive in her new routine. She learned to navigate challenges with a newfound confidence that I had always known she possessed, but which had been buried beneath the weight of her previous relationship. She discovered hobbies she had forgotten she loved, reconnected with old friends, and even began entertaining the idea of traveling. Seeing her blossom into a stronger, more secure version of herself became one of the most rewarding parts of my days. Every step she took forward felt like a small, quiet victory, not only for her but for everyone who had silently rooted for her resilience. With time, the sharp edge of my mother-in-law's anger dulled, though the distance remained. She never brought up the issue again, and neither did I. We coexisted in a sort of polite equilibrium, acknowledging each other's presence without venturing into deeper emotional territories. It was an unspoken agreement that allowed family gatherings to remain peaceful. Despite the coldness that lingered beneath her polite expressions, I found I no longer felt the sting of her disapproval. My focus had shifted from seeking her understanding to embracing my own clarity. As new seasons passed, I noticed that my own life felt fuller somehow. Perhaps it was because I had learned to release the weight of others' perceptions. Perhaps it was because the chaos of the past had made me more appreciative of ordinary, peaceful days. Or perhaps it was simply the natural outcome of choosing integrity over approval. Whatever the reason, I sensed a growing steadiness within myself, a quiet inner confidence that wasn't loud or dramatic, but deeply rooted. I often reflected on everything that had happened, not with regret or bitterness, but with a sense of recognition. I had seen firsthand how families could unravel under pressure, how misunderstandings could create distance, and how emotions left unexamined could harden into resentment. But I had also seen how compassion, even when met with resistance, could spark transformation. My sister-in-law's journey had shown me that kindness, however costly, could plant seeds of hope where despair once lived. And my own journey had taught me that doing the right thing sometimes meant standing alone, not because others wanted you there, but because your values kept you anchored. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky with soft shades of gold and violet, I realized how much inner peace had quietly been growing within me. It wasn't that everything was perfect, far from it, but the turbulence had taught me to embrace imperfection without fear. I had learned to let go of the need to fix what wasn't mine to mend, to accept what couldn't be changed, and to trust that my actions carried their own truth even when misunderstood. Over time, my relationship with my sister-in-law became a source of steady warmth in my life. She visited often, brought small gifts or homemade dishes, and spoke openly about her dreams for the future. She no longer carried the shadows that had once followed her. She stood tall, steady, and bright. Her strength became a testament to the power of being supported at the right moment, even if that support came at a personal cost to the one offering it. She never tried to repay the money I had lent her, despite her repeated offers, and I never accepted because the true value had never been in the transaction. It had been in the act of trust, in believing in her when she struggled to believe in herself. Occasionally, I would catch my mother-in-law watching us from across a room, her expression unreadable. I wondered if she ever reconsidered her reaction, if she ever realized how much unnecessary pain the situation had caused. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't, but I learned not to hinge my peace on her perspective. People change when they are ready, not when we expect them to. And sometimes they never change at all. I accepted that reality without resentment, choosing instead to focus on the relationships that nurtured growth and understanding. Life continued to unfold with its own rhythm. Some days brought challenges, others brought joy, but all of them carried a sense of forward motion. I found comfort in routine and meaningful conversations, in shared meals, in quiet evenings spent reading or reflecting. I discovered new ways to find fulfillment, new reasons to feel grateful, and new layers within myself that had been shaped by everything I had lived through. Looking back, I realized that the moment I decided to help my sister-in-law had not only changed her trajectory, but had also transformed my own. It had taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply whispers that compassion matters, even when no one else understands. It had shown me that doing the right thing may lead to conflict. But conflict doesn't diminish the value of integrity, and it had reminded me that family, despite all its complexities, can still hold scattered pieces of love even when fractured. The story did not end with dramatic forgiveness or reconciled tensions because real life rarely follows the patterns of neat endings. Instead, it settled into a quieter truth, a truth shaped by growth, by resilience, by acceptance, and by the understanding that some acts of kindness carry echoes far beyond the moment they are offered. And so, life moved forward, calm and steady, leaving behind a trail of lessons that would remain with me long after the emotional storms had passed.